Welcome to the 2021-2022 World Language Webinar Series. Today's broadcast focuses on the TEL learning experience domain, the teacher effectiveness for language learning, specifically subcriteria LE5. This is part 2 of this part of the series. Today's agenda is coming up on the screen. It includes a welcome and introductions for everyone, then an overview of the TEL criteria and its subcriteria. You see it there on the screen. We'll also do some reflection and investigation with implementing LE5 in our proficiency-based North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, as well as identifying evidence of LE5 characteristics and behaviors in K-12 World Language classrooms. After that, we'll do a wrap-up and some reminders. I'm going to pause for just a second. I'm getting some input that you cannot hear me. If you are able to hear me, please go ahead and indicate that by raising your hand electronically on your control panel or sending a message. All right, it looks like audio is working fairly well. If you're still not hearing, please go ahead and adjust your microphone. Give me just a moment and I'm going to go ahead and share some tips on technology here. All right, let's continue on. That's our agenda for today. Let's go ahead and do our welcome and introductions. My name is Anne Marie Gunter. I'm the World Languages Consultant at the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction. We're going to do some poll questions for your introductions in a moment, but that means I need to make sure that you know where your WebEx event panel is, your control panel, as well as how to use it. You see on the screen a screenshot of that. I'm going to start in the upper right corner. Notice you will have access to a lot of different features, starting with the video layout. And I will caution you that depending on what type of device you use to join today and which browser you chose, your display may look a little different than what's on the screen, but that's okay. So you have a way to control what the video layout is, as well as to create a floating panel view if you would like. Typically, the only thing we're showing are the slides, so those should be prominent on your screen. And then you see there in the middle, the meeting controls are the main things that you'll be working with throughout. On those meeting controls, on the one on the left is the little microphone. It's red and because everyone comes in muted so that the recording can be smooth without any background noise. And then the one on the right, the little X, is the one you will click on when you exit our broadcast today. If something happens and you have to exit early or you accidentally get exited, you can always come back in using the same link you used to join the first time. It should still work. There in the middle, you have buttons to the chat box. It looks like most of you have found that. When we do activities, please make sure in the chat box that you send those to all attendees so everyone can see your responses. There are also some other controls there that we don't work with a lot, but we will be working with the poll feature and so forth that will come up in your control panel. All right, let's introduce you to our guest speakers for LE5 for part 2. All of our guest speakers for this series this year are world language teachers who've distinguished themselves by earning recognitions like the Flank Teacher of the Year recognition or by earning things like their Global Educator Digital Badge or GEDB. Emily Burrus is our guest speaker for today, and I'll let her introduce herself as well as the recognitions and things that she has earned.
Hello, I'm Emily Burrus. I teach French at Pisgah High School over in Haywood County, so the western part of our state. And I'm here to talk about my Global Educators Digital Badge. And if you're unfamiliar with it, that is North Carolina's designation for like global ready educators. To get this process, there's the link that's in the chat for y'all. You make your professional development plan like you do every year. You sign a memorandum of agreement that you have decided you're going to take this process, and you earn 100 professional development hours in global education. That sounds daunting, but I'll give you some tips on where to find resources for that. Anne Marie's emails are a great place to start. And then you have your capstone lesson, which is probably a lesson that you already have, that you just have to write it a different way, get it observed, and then submit it for review. So I'm eager to talk with y'all about that today.
All right, thank you so much. Also, Emily has several other recognitions. She was the North Carolina chapter's AATF chapter's Teacher of the Year in 2019. And as you can see, she shared some pictures pre-pandemic of her students and her classroom. So welcome, Emily. All right, we want to get to know you as well. So our first poll question asks what every teacher always asks, what motivated you today? And specifically, what motivated you to participate in this webinar today? You can check all that apply. It may be because you want to access professional development made for world languages. You may be here to earn one contact hour for license renewal. You may want to gather information to share with your colleagues in one of your groups. You may want to learn more about implementing our state standards from other world language educators, or you may want to find out more about state standards, resources, policies, and the like. I'll go ahead and open our poll, and you should be able to just click on the choices that apply to your motivations for joining us today. Thank you so much for jumping in quickly on the poll. We've got quite a bit of time left, about 30 seconds, but it looks like almost everyone has responded, so that's great. All right, I'll go ahead and close our poll, and then I'll show everyone the poll results as we talk a little bit about them. So it looks like the majority of you are here either to earn that one contact hour for license renewal or to access professional development made especially for world languages. And that's the very reason why we do this annual webinar series, is to make sure that you have focused professional development for world language education, as well as an opportunity to earn contact hours towards your licensure renewal. I'll talk about this at the end, but look for your certificate about a week or so after this broadcast on your contact hour. Also, it looks like over half of you are here to either gather information to share with your colleagues or to learn about implementing our state standards from other world language educators. Learning from each other is one of the reasons why we do this webinar series too, and have our guest speakers from all over the state, so you can learn from them, but also learn from each other. We'll have some activities where you'll be sharing things from your own classrooms and schools with one another. Also, if you're gathering information to share with others, please know that we post all of these materials as part of the archives. You can get the slides either as Google Slides, PDF, or PowerPoint slides, as well as the recording and any handouts. And finally, it looks like about a third of you are here because you want to find out more about our state standards, the resources with them, and our policies. And that's great. Please know that you can always ask a question in the chat about any of those things. If it's something in general about what we're talking about, be sure and put it so everyone can see it. If it's something more specific, put it in there and I will respond to you individually. All right, well, thank you for sharing about that, about what motivated you to participate today. And of course, we like to ask, where are you joining us from today? You may be in one of the 8 regions across North Carolina. These are economic prosperity regions as defined by our state legislature, or maybe somewhere in the US or even somewhere outside of the US. So once again, I'll open our poll. This one's a really short one because you're only just picking the one place you are today where you're joining us from. All right, we're about to finish the poll. Be sure and get your answer in. So as you can see, you should be able to see the results in your control panel. We've got quite a spread from across the state in almost every region, as well as a few people joining us from outside of North Carolina. So welcome to everyone. All right, so for today, let's take a close look at the TEL criteria you see on the screen. The TEL criteria, or TEL project, Teacher Effectiveness for Language Learning, is a national project that is aligned to national standards as well as world language best practices. And that's why it's good for us to use it in relation to implementing our state standards. Our focus today is the learning experience, and the sub-criteria you see is LE5. The teacher provides opportunities for students to investigate cultural products, practices, and perspectives in order to interact appropriately with others. So those are those 3 P's we talk about with culture: products, practices, and perspectives. When we think about TEL criteria LE5 supporting our North Carolina World Language Essential Standards, we're obviously focusing on our 4th essential standard, which talks about culture. You see here on the screen a shot of what we call our weave graphic that shows how our 4 essential standards, with 1 being interpersonal communication, 2 interpretive communication, 3 presentational communication, and 4 culture, how those are woven in with our 3 different strands with connections to language and literacy, connections to other disciplines, and communities. I know you've all seen those standards as well as the objectives that go with them for each of the standards within each strand. It's important for us to think about how this looks together and how it weaves together to create world language education. The screenshot you see here is actually from our administrator guides for world languages. They are designed specifically for administrators, like principals who come in and evaluate us every year, who may need to know about our standards and how those look in the classroom. So these were created as a support document for implementing our state standards. In the chat, I put a link to each of our administrator guides for world languages. We have one for each of our K-12 programs within our state standards. We have one for classical languages like Latin and Ancient Greek. We have one for dual and heritage languages like dual language immersion, as well as heritage language courses 1 and 2 for high school credit. And then for modern languages, whether it's an alphabetic language, a logographic language like Chinese or Japanese, or a visual language like American Sign Language. All of them have the graphic you see here on the screen on page 1. All right. Well, like any teacher, of course, I want you to have the handout for today. And so I want you to have your own copy of the TEL Learning Experience Domain Criteria. Now, I mentioned this was a national project. You see here that I've got the one from 2019 for us. The TEL project itself actually started about 10 years ago. And the first publication of these domain criteria documents was in 2014. After feedback and implementation with them, they did some updates, and so we're using the newest version from 2019. I am going to put in the chat box links to the TEL Learning Experience Domain document. You can download this as a PDF from the Google Drive that we have available with our materials, or go to the TEL Framework webpage where there are all 7 documents and just pick the Learning Experience Domain Criteria one. So I'll pause for a moment while you do that. Please download a copy for yourself and then skim the 4-lettered sub-criteria for this session's focus, that LE5. I'll pause for a moment while you do that. All right. I hope you got your handout in the way you would like for now, and we'll continue on in taking a look at LE5. One thing that we like to do in this series, and we like to do in general as teachers, of course, is to reflect on our practice. And I want us to reflect on how we might implement LE5 because remember, like I said, it focuses on the 3 Ps of culture and how that fits within our North Carolina World Language Essentials standards. Here you see that same statement, the LE5 statement, about the teacher providing opportunities for students to investigate cultural products, practices, and perspectives in order to interact appropriately with others. We're going to go through each of the sub-criteria, starting with A. And this one focuses on the teacher facilitating activities that allow students to recognize and understand how their own culture affects their views of other cultures. And that's one of the things that's really important in our state standards when we think about culture is to help our students reflect on their own culture, their lived experience in North Carolina, as well as the culture or cultures that they're learning about. Because often with our languages, there isn't just one culture they're learning about or even one country. It's many cultures and subcultures, just like their own culture is here in North Carolina. B is very similar, where the teacher facilitates activities that allow students, and then this time it's to recognize and understand the perspectives they and others have. When we talk about the 3 Ps, the products, practices, and perspectives, perspectives are the values that are associated with cultural beliefs and actions. And so we don't want to forget how important those perspectives are and what people are learning about culture and the beliefs and values around the culture or any particular aspect of it when they're learning a language. C continues on with the teacher facilitating activities that allow students to interact with cultural products, practices, and perspectives to contextualize language tasks. We've talked a little bit about perspectives. Products are the obvious things, right? The sometimes referred to as flags, food, and festivals, but of course we know products go much deeper than that. They go with things like the laws that are established or how things are arranged geographically or organized throughout a country that you might be studying. The practices look at how those things appear in everyday life, what you do in order to implement that. And then, of course, the perspectives, like I said, have to do with the beliefs and values associated with it. And finally, D, the last one, the teacher facilitates activities to allow students to use their language skills and cultural awareness to interact effectively in a cultural context other than their own. One thing that we always have to remember about our state standards is that when we're implementing those and thinking about the language skills, what students know and can do with the language they're learning, is that they are always in the target language. You know, our standard, of course, is 90% or more in the target language when we're teaching, but the same is true for student interaction. They should be 90% or more in the target language. And so as teachers, we're challenged to think carefully about how we support our students staying in the target language and how we can reassure them that the language skills they're developing, especially early on, are what they need to express themselves and in this case to interact effectively and with intercultural competence. All right, well now that we've seen those 4 sub-criteria that go with LE5, let's think about each of those. And when you think about your teaching style and the pedagogy and the approaches you use in the classroom, as well as how your students learn, which of these sub-criteria are professional strengths for you? You can choose 1 or 2. There are 4 overall. I'll go ahead and open this poll. We've got a little bit longer to think about this because this does require some reflection. So what are your professional strengths when it comes to LE5? All right, we've got about 30 seconds left in the poll. Be sure and get your answers in. All right, thank you for responding and sharing your professional strengths. I'm going to go ahead and show you what our results were. Well, we have strengths across the board. These sub-criteria that are on the screen are strengths for one or two of you on every account. The main strength seems to be B and C, where over 40% of you said those are professional strengths for you. But A and D also got about a third from you. So again, strengths across the board when it comes to culture and implementing our 3 Ps in the classroom. I'm going to go ahead and leave those up on your control panel because we're going to be using them as we continue through our broadcast. And now Emily is going to share with us about her professional strengths.
The whole global digital badge process, it focuses on the global competencies. So investigate the world, recognize their own and others' perspectives, and communicate ideas and take action. So that's when you're writing this lesson plan, what you focus on. So for me, how I got started on this journey, my AIG teacher from when I was in elementary school, I'm a product of my school system that I work in. She forwarded an email from Helga Fasciano that said, "How prepared are you to foster global awareness in your students? Do you know about the Global Educators Digital Badge for Teachers, where you have the opportunity to focus your professional development to develop your own global context and understanding of how to integrate throughout your curriculum those chances to build global competency in your students?" And my lesson plan, if you ever want to use it, I'll put the title in the chat. You look it up in SchoolNet, and that's where all of these are housed. So if you search GEDB, you'll see many content areas if your coworkers are interested in them. And for me to focus on like facilitating, recognizing, understanding perspectives, I had done the EU to NC tour through the University of North Carolina. And I had also done a training on how to use SchoolNet that was given in the summer in my school system. So when I went to write my PDP, I knew I wanted to integrate those two things together. So I thought this would be a great way to do that. And I'm a lateral entry French teacher, so I had a whole other life plan, and this was my secondary. So I wanted my students to, we've all done the let's plan a trip to Europe lesson plan. We've done that. So I wanted to take it a step further and see how transportation is. So when we were looking up train tickets, we were seeing the CO2 for each one. It's printed on or it's listed on the information. And so they used their French to navigate these French websites to see where they wanted to go and then try to make more uh, connections with travel and why travel isn't the same where we live in rural Western North Carolina. So the first part of the lesson is going over the vocabulary, making sure they understand, um, the how to use the websites. And then the second lesson plan goes into they have to plan the trip. Then the third piece of it is that they now are trying to get this teacher or this person from France, it's a fictional person I created, to plan a global minded trip in our area. And that's a challenge for Western North Carolina. Thankfully, we have Asheville. There's lots of resources in Asheville. And so by planning a trip for someone, they have to sell our area. So they're using their French to explain why Western North Carolina is a place worth visiting, and then how it can be, what green resources we have. There's not many, so they think creatively. And facilitating activities that allow them to interact with cultural products, practices, and perspectives. They're looking at this from what are the products of transportation in Europe? What do we have here? Why does it matter? And then their perspectives of why they care about it. I have got another project that I've been involved in. It's called Worlds of Experience through the University of Arizona. And they make, but they show you how to do it. It's an interactive virtual international field experience. And we use the platform of ThingLink, and you plan an interactive um, lesson, and it can be really simple, one slide, or it can be multiple. And for me, I focused on Haiti with my project because that's a Francophone culture that I feel gets underappreciated. So I planned my whole unit on that to where they were investigating the Thing Link with resources that I provided so they could focus on, okay, from Haiti, what are their products, practices, and perspectives? And it starts with a map interface. And I have the link to that lesson on another activity we're going to do. So I don't know if anyone has questions. This might not be the time for questions, but that's how I focus on in my classes is I try to say, what are the products? And then we go through the cultural iceberg of, yes, there are flags and festivals, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we go deeper than that. And so I show them a cultural iceberg of, when we're getting into these other areas. So when we're talking about other cultures in our class, they're able to see beyond just the products, but then they're seeing the practices and perspectives. And it's something that we work on every time that we take one of our virtual tours. We do those on Voyage Vondrady in our class. So it gives them a framework to where as we go through, I have a digital passport that they fill out. And that project came about through Carolina Navigators. They did a workshop and I met another AIG teacher and she did a passport project with the flags and festivals, but I took that and adapted it digitally. So those are how I focus on it in my class.
All right. Well, I am putting some links to the things that Emily mentioned. Put the link to the EU and NC study tours. They're available to us at the UNC Center for European Studies. I'm also going to put a link to our Carolina Navigators main page. Both Carolina Navigators and the EU and NC study tours are part of the UNC Global initiatives. And there are a number of things that are available to K-12 and K-14 teachers, in addition to our colleagues in higher education through UNC Global and all of the area studies centers that we have. So Emily's mentioned just a few. I am looking for questions. Emily had mentioned, do you have any questions? Feel free to put questions for her in the chat. She'll be able to see them and respond. And Emily, did you want to show your screen or anything with the project you described from the Global Educator Digital Badge?
I put in the chat where they can look it up, and I feel like that might be easier. If they're interested in it, then they can pull it up and access it. But there's not much to show. It's a professionally written lesson plan, my very first professional written lesson plan. So it's not that interesting to look at, but they are welcome to use it and download it through SchoolNet. So I don't think I need to share my screen for that.
Okay, great. Yeah, and all of the Global Educator Digital Badge capstone projects are available through SchoolNet, as Emily said. In world languages, we've had about 5 different teachers complete the Global Educator Digital Badge since it became available in 2015. Overall, throughout the state, there's a little over 130 people who've completed that. So world languages is represented there in different languages as well as different levels. Some of the GEDB earners in world languages are from high school or middle school. Some are from our dual language immersion programs at elementary. So there's just a good variety of things available in SchoolNet with the GEDB. Well, I'm still looking for questions. Feel free to ask Emily anything about how she implements the culture standard in her classroom, because she's kind of described that and her professional strengths here, or anything about the GEDB that you want to know. It is kind of a long process. The 100 hours of professional development can be done over 2 years and sometimes more before you embark on that capstone project. There's also quite a bit of support for our GEDB earners along the way. Emily mentioned writing a professional lesson plan that's published. I know many of us as teachers write lesson plans on a daily basis just for us though. But when you do it professionally, there's some guidelines that you get and some feedback along the way to make sure it is what you want it to be before it gets published for everyone.
There is so much help that is provided when you do this process. I found a lot of help within we have a monthly meeting set aside called Global Connections, and it's where global educators can share ideas and give different presentations. And so within that group, there are 5 of us in Haywood County. There are 2 history teachers, an elementary school, a kindergarten teacher, and then a math teacher and myself that went through this process relatively at the same time. And they do give really great feedback. And I know that they have changed the procedure from when I went through it. It is much more user friendly now than what it was whenever I went through. But the feedback that is given is what we should be thinking about when we make professional lesson plans. What we know to do in our classes intrinsically as teachers is very different than if we're giving this lesson to someone that's brand new or maybe new to the classroom. So it's a great process to go through. I encourage anyone to do it. I know it seems daunting, but you probably already have a lesson that it would just take minor tweaking to go through this process. And going through the area study centers, they have a lot of great free professional development. And right now, most of it is online and free. So that's, good news if you're interested in this process.
All right, well, I don't see any questions yet, but like I said, feel free to put any questions in. We'll go ahead and move forward with our presentation because we have some activities and things like that still to come. All right, so now we're going to move to evidence of LE5 characteristics and behaviors in our K-12 world language classrooms. I know over the past couple of years, what we consider our classroom sometimes has expanded and changed. But it's any learning space where we meet our students and help them build the proficiency in the language they're learning. So again, when we think about LE5, I've just got a screenshot. Of course, you can still see this too in your control panel. We think about those 4 sub-criteria that go with LE5. And we specifically want to ask ourselves, what do teachers and or students do in the classroom to show evidence of LE5 sub-criteria? And I want you to pause for a moment and consider, what does that question mean to you? What is it that teachers do? What is that students do, or your students in particular, and you as a teacher specifically, in the classroom to show evidence of the LE5 sub-criteria that relate to products, practices, and perspectives of culture? You may want to reflect on the sub-criteria that you identified as professional strengths, or even look at some of the others to consider what else you could be doing to build up what you're doing or your students are doing in the classroom for this. One thing that I always think is important is we can look for answers based on the verbs. We're going to talk about what teachers and students do. Obviously, we're looking at those verbs. Notice that for this one, it's all about the teacher providing opportunities and facilitating activities. That's where our verbs are in this particular TEL sub-criteria. We also want to look at what the students do and what verbs are associated with them. So they're recognizing and understanding, they're interacting, and they're using their language skills and cultural awareness. So we're going to do a Jamboard activity. Jamboard is a Google tool, just like Google Spreadsheets or Google Slides. By a quick show of hands on your control panel, your electronic hands, please raise your hand if you've worked with Jamboard before as part of your Google suite of tools. Okay, so I see a few people who've worked with Jamboards before. All right, a few more. Great, see some notes in the chat box. Good. All right. Oh, it looks like we've got a lot of folks with experience with Jamboard. Great. Well, the great thing about Jamboard is obviously first it's free. It's one of your Google tools, but also you could do quite a bit with it. And so we're going to look at the question, what characteristics and behaviors would someone observe in your world language classroom if they were looking for evidence for one of those LE5 sub-criteria? So what would they see in your classroom? This is your chance to talk about what any observer would find in your classroom if they walked in and were looking for things related to culture and the teaching of it. We're going to think about these LE5 sub-criteria like we have been already, and then write about them using a sticky note in Jamboard, titling it with the letter of the sub-criteria you're writing about, one sticky per comment, please. You're going to write your response in 2 sentences or less. If you've worked with Jamboard before, you know it's kind of limited space, but you can write quite a lot if you want. And you can include your name on the sticky or just remain anonymous. And then also, after you do that, take a few minutes to check out the other ideas on the Jamboard. Real quickly, I do have a slide that talks about how to use Jamboard, and we have our own Jamboard using a bit.ly link. But most of you are familiar with the fact that there's a control panel. You click on the little icon on the control panel. It looks like a sticky note that opens up a sticky note where you can choose the color of yellow, green, blue, pink, or orange. You write your response to the question, and then you click Save, and it posts your sticky note on the Jamboard so everyone can see it. So here are our directions. I'm going to go ahead and put the links to the Jamboard in our chat box. You can go right out there. When you do get out there, you'll see that Emily has already posted at least one sticky for us. I don't know if anyone else has had a chance to yet, but you can go directly to our LE5 characteristics and behaviors Jamboard. I'll also post the bit.ly link so that you can get to it that way. All right, well, we have 6 minutes for this activity. Please go ahead and jump in. Answer that question. What characteristics and or behaviors would someone observe in your world language classroom if they were looking for evidence for one of the LE5 sub-criteria? I'll let you get working. All right, I'm going to pop over to our Jamboard so we can see what the first round of stickies are bringing for us in sharing our experiences as world language teachers. Thank you to everyone who's sharing on the sticky notes. Be sure you take a moment too and read what others are sharing. You might get an idea for your own classroom or see another teacher who's using the same kinds of activities or strategies that you are. Thank you so much for sharing all of these great ideas. Please take a moment and look at all of the activities and things that are happening in classrooms. We have several people talking about comparing and contrasting different types of products, practices, and perspectives, and really helping their students see their own culture through new eyes, as well as learn about the variety of cultures that they're studying about through the language that they're learning. We have people mentioning authentic resources like materials that are posted on YouTube by native speakers of the language or first language speakers. We have other resources like the Carolina Navigator Culture Kits, magazines, recipes, menus, all in the target language from the target language speaking countries. We've got people talking about cultural readings and doing cultural research projects using what's available online. We've also got people talking about interacting with others using the language, in fact, and having pen pals and Flipgrid e-pals. Please note in the chat, we've got Cecilia who said she would love to connect with the person that's doing Pen Pals. So if you've got a good resource for Pen Pals or a good way to connect with others to have those Pen Pals for your students, you might want to leave a note for Cecilia in the chat box so that you can connect together and share that information. Oh, I also see a note from Carmen that one of the links that got posted, a bit.ly link here on one of our stickies, needs to update the permissions so that others can see it. All right. Well, again, thank you for participating in this activity and learning from each other. I will, of course, post our Jamboard as a handout with the archives of this broadcast so that we can use it going into the future. All right, I'm conscious of our time too, so let's go ahead and close out our broadcast for today with some wrap up and reminders. The first thing I want to share with everybody is that we are staying connected. You can sign up for any of the NCDPI listservs at the link you see there, the bit.ly/NCDPI updates. I'll put that link in the chat as well as the direct link in case you need that one. You can sign up, like I said, for any of the NCDPI listservs. I will make sure that you're signed up on the one that's in bold there, the World Language Instructors listserv, so that you receive updates and information about our webinars and different resources and announcements that we share on that one. There's also a World Language Education News listserv, one for dual language immersion or DLI educators, and one for the North Carolina Linguafolio that we do, the formative assessment tool for language learning. Plus, there's many others. There is, in fact, a listserv with a newsletter for global education if you want to learn more about the GEDB and some of the other global education recognitions or other global education work happening in North Carolina that impacts world languages. Also, I want to remind you that our whole series spreads throughout the year. You can see that we have had parts 1 and 2 for our World Language Webinar series this year, looking at 5 different sub-criteria that supports the implementation of our World Language Essential Standards. So we did environment, learning experience, and we're going to wrap up the year with the performance and feedback tell domain. If you want more information about the webinar series, please go to the World Language Webinar Series Canvas Hub. It's the one-stop shop for everyone about all of our broadcasts for this year. There's a direct link to it there, as well as our bit.ly link of WL and NC webinars. In addition to our current series for this school year, we have several years of archives if you want to research back in there and look for additional materials that you could use for your local professional development or for your own learning professionally. Also, don't forget we have asynchronous credit options. So when you participate in a live broadcast, of course, you get your certificate of attendance. But if you don't participate in the live broadcast, or you do, but you have a colleague who might want to get the same information, they can still earn asynchronous credit by completing the work with the archives, including an exit ticket that's here. Those exit tickets are due usually some weeks after the initial broadcast. So the exit tickets for the LE4 parts 1 and 2 that were broadcast in January and February are due by March 16th, which is next Wednesday. And then the exit tickets for LE5 parts 1 and 2 are due by April 13th, which is the Wednesday after the start of the next part of the series with PF1. All of those links that you need to get to those exit tickets are in our World Language Webinar Series Canvas Hub. Speaking of the next part of the series, and actually the finale of the series, we are going to focus on PF1, Performance and Feedback number 1, with broadcasts on Wednesdays. They are World Language Wednesdays, as we know, on April 6th for part 1 and May 4th for part 2. This is the last part of the series, as I said, so our final webinar is on May 4th. Our webinars are always from 4 to 5 p.m. Hopefully that's after school for everyone and when you are finished with your student responsibilities so you can focus on your own learning for that hour. Registration links for the PF1 webinars are posted in that Canvas hub that we just linked, and I'll put the direct links to each one so that you can use those or pass them along if you need to for our upcoming webinars. Also, just a reminder, our contact hour or CEU certificates are coming. In North Carolina, as in many places, our public school units, which is our districts and charter schools, must approve professional development offerings in all formats. So participation in today's live broadcast earns that certificate of attendance, like I said, and you can look for an email with your attached certificate approximately 1 week from today. Sometimes we get it out a little bit faster, but we have to take a while to process our attendance report and activity report from the broadcast. But it should come to you through email. That's it. Here's our contact information. You see on the screen your NCDPI World Languages team. We do have a new website as of 2022, the start of 2022. So our NCDPI landing page has its own spot. You can go to bit.ly/NC World Languages. As most of you know, with shortened URLs, the capitalization is important there. I've just put that in the chat box for you to link to if you would like. I'm also on Twitter, and we post on Twitter as #WL Wednesdays. As I said, I am your World Languages consultant. I'm here to answer all of your questions. You can contact me through email or phone, and I'm happy to answer any of your questions or share materials and resources that we have or point you to those online. Also, supporting our work in World Languages is my supervisor, Dr. Stacy Daniels. She's the section chief of English Language Arts, or ELA, and Languages. So she has ELA, ESL, and US, World Languages. And finally, Teresa Parker is an important person to know because she is the one that will send you the email with your certificate of attendance for today. So look for an email from Teresa. That's all I have for today. Thank you so much for joining us. Emily, thank you many times over for sharing what you've done with the Global Educator Digital Badge and how you implement culture in your classroom. She's posted a note to us in the chat. Thank you, and you are very welcome. She enjoyed sharing with you today all the things that she's done, and please be sure to look up her capstone project in the InSchoolNet as part of her Global Educator Digital Badge work. And Emily, I see you're getting a lot of thank yous for sharing all the information that you did.
It was my pleasure. And if you have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat as well as the title of my lesson again.
That would be great. And that way we'll have that as a reference, and I also can post it on the link, for example, to your lesson as part of our archives for this broadcast. All right, there it is. All right. Well, again, thank you to everyone for joining us. I hope you have a great evening, and we look forward to seeing you soon, perhaps next at one of our World Language webinar broadcasts or some other opportunity for world language teachers together.